I'm super excited to be joined today by Eliron Ekstein, a co-founder and CEO of Ravin AI. And our topic today is data-driven decisions in the automotive industry. So Eliron, first of all, have I said your name correctly? Probably not. So
Yeah, certainly. Certainly. Thank you.
awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hugely appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. So, I mean, it's great for our listeners to understand who you are. So, let's find out a little bit more about you. What's your background? How did you get into co-founding Ravin AI?
Yeah, so I've been in the auto and transportation business for a good number of years, well over 10 years now. And before starting Raven, I was actually working at Shell, working on digital solutions and actually launching a few solutions for the auto space. If you think about Shell, many people know it as the energy giant, as an oil and gas company, but actually it's one of the largest retailers in the world, especially in the transportation sector. So millions and millions of drivers pull in and out of Shell petrol stations around the world. And one of the areas I was responsible for was to drive new business towards those vehicles, those drivers, those fleets that use the petrol stations. So we were brainstorming several ideas and we were investing in a number of concepts like telematics at the time. And one of the ideas was actually running vehicle inspections on the forecourt. And for that, I actually teamed up with my co-founder and CTO, Roman Sandler, who has a PhD in computer vision. And we actually pitched this to Shell. And Shell looked at this idea and said, well, it looks awesome, but we don't see this as a Shell business. Why don't you guys start something separate? But we'll be your first money as investors. And that's what started the story at Raven.
That's a fantastic background and story. Yeah, it always helps when you've got kind of a backing, two things: one, financial backing, and then the second of such a kind of a global, knowledgeable based business with amazing connections. So, in terms of what Ravin AI does, you kind of touched on that it was kind of born out of an inspection process. What do you guys do? What's your secret sauce, and what do you guys do?
So the secret sauce and the real concept behind Raven is that you can leverage almost any type of camera, be it a CCTV type camera that you position on a road and you drive through, or a mobile solution that you basically walk around the vehicle and take a sort of a video. And our algorithm basically analyzes vehicles as a whole and then helps you detect and inspect them, and basically prepare a condition report. So we have several types of condition reports. The first one is going into the rental car companies, the leasing companies, where you actually return a vehicle and you can create a report on incremental damage. So they can go ahead and kind of track that damage, decide what to do, whether they want to claim against that damage or repair. The second type of report is around used car inspections. So if you are preparing to sell a car or you want to assess how to buy the car, and that goes mainly to dealerships and to auctions. And the third type of report is insurance claims, and that's basically repair suggestions, whereby you as a customer can actually scan your vehicle after an incident, and we would create a sort of an early estimate of the extent of the damage.
Okay, so and obviously, I mean, it's super interesting because there's lots of nuances around that kind of inspection piece at the moment. But how does the camera how does your current solution how does your solution compare to what people are currently doing at the moment? Are they using clipboards? Are they making notes? Are they creating videos? What's currently out there essentially?
Yeah, so a lot of existing solutions, including some of them using artificial intelligence, rely on a person to take the images. And when you
Okay.
rely on a person to take images, you basically are asking them to make a judgment call on what is damage, what is not damage. That's where the problems begin because your definition of damage, especially if you're not a professional, is highly dependent on your level of understanding of vehicles. And also, you have some incentives. So, if you're returning a car after a rental, you may not have the incentive of documenting all the damage. I'm putting this gently. you probably have the opposite
Yeah,
incentive.
yeah, you're going to lean towards, nah, that was already there, rather
That's
than
all.
kind of, yeah, exactly.
So I think essentially what a solution is there for is making it much more objective. So we're using the technology to actually guide you on the scene to take the right images and take lots of images in the process, such that you have the backup data and have the professionals make a decision on that vehicle, even if they're not next to the vehicle.
And does that data and that imagery, does it compare it to previous data that's already been uploaded, or does it compare it to what normal wear and tear looks like? So, like you said, one of the examples you gave was kind of used car inspection. So you would have constant if someone started using your product from the start, you would have a constant kind of update in terms of the quality of the repair damage, and I presume there's kind of parameters that you would put on there. How does that? Yeah, how does that work in terms of the parameters of yes, that's fine to go away with, or and no, that's not, and then also, yeah, how does that data aggregate if you've already got a vehicle that's part of that kind of used car inventory, essentially?
So it's a fascinating question because basically, indeed, if you have that vehicle more than once in your database, you will start creating a profile of that vehicle and you would understand changes in its condition, changes in the usage,
Mm-hmm.
which is much more granular than what you have today. You may have some records of serious incidents, and you may have some records from let's say, periodical testing of that vehicle, which is mostly mechanical. But from a physical standpoint, it really creates a profile of how the vehicle has been used. Now, the technology is able to create the kind of that incremental report of what's been repaired, what's been replaced, what is additional damage that occurred. But also, it can start profiling a vehicle from scratch. So it doesn't have to know necessarily what the vehicle was before. It can start from scratch and say, look, these are the damages we see. We think that's the extent of the damage. And that's done by training it on hundreds of millions of images, actually, that we've achieved.
Okay, so we talked about a little bit about kind of the insurance, not necessarily insurance claims, about the kind of the hiring of a car. We've seen a huge adoption, especially in the UK, over the past 2 to 3 years, of the likes of CarWow, Kazoo, Motorway, of car marketplaces, essentially. And this is where essentially people will digitally sell cars online. Everything's done online. It might be the whole experience is done online. Now, the majority of the time when people buy a car, it's a bit like mobile phones. When you go and buy a car, you've got a car to sell, essentially. Like, you buy a mobile phone, you need to upgrade it. So at that point, it's a perfect opportunity to kind of get a used car back into the system for those dealerships to resell. So have you seen much of an adoption in terms of the car marketplace solution platforms for your type of software?
Absolutely. So I can give you two cases. One of our investors is actually OpenLane, which is one of the largest marketplaces for used vehicles in North America, both Canada and the US. And the other customer that is using, I'll give you another just example, is a company called Gauge Automotive, which is basically buying up used vehicles from consumers like you and me and immediately sells them to dealers.
Okay.
And what the product allows them to do is quickly assess the vehicle by walking around it, gathering all the necessary data, and expediting the sale process. So today, if you look at the platforms you mentioned in the UK, there is some inspection process that takes place, but there is a lot of risk still involved
Mhm.
because the buyer may need to do some body work, may need to make a few changes to the vehicle before optimizing its resale value. By having the data from our inspection that you do as a seller, as part of the sale process, they will have already a condition report ready online that gives that visibility, and it just enhances the liquidity of those platforms. You have more buyers buying with less risk.
And in just kind of moving on from that, then, so in terms of someone utilizing the Ravin AI solution in comparison to how they would normally would profile. Is the feedback that you're getting more, you're getting less consumer problems because they're saying, hang on a second, there was a scratch here or there was an issue here? What's the adoption rate in terms of what you're utilizing as a solution in comparison, and why are people adopting the Ravin AI in over kind of utilizing
Yeah.
their existing
I mean,
operations?
I mean, put simply, there are kind of three main reasons. The first one is time to market. When you're doing that kind of inspection up front, you can sell the vehicle kind of almost immediately.
Yeah,
Um, just like you're selling a stock on the market, right? Nobody's asking question. It's a digital asset. This one is a physical asset, but you can already sell it online because there is much less risk. Obviously, if the engine isn't working,
yeah.
there needs to be a disclaimer around that. But everything else is kind of known. So you flip the car more quickly. So that's the first motivation. And then we've shown that vehicles with our solution, with our condition reports, which is digital driven by AI, are highly more likely to get sold more quickly. So we've got one of our customers is an auction in the US, and they list cars using our system, and they have shown that since introducing those type of reports, the cars move like 20% faster. So a car that would be sold, in 5 days is suddenly sold in like 4 days or even less.
And
Simply because people have more confidence in those reports.
yeah, exactly. So does it automatically kind of output a standardized report and then highlight images of areas that should be looked at? What does that or is it dependent on what the kind of the user wants to do?
It depends a bit, but if you look at like a standard report of a used car, we would have a 360 view of that vehicle, so you could actually kind of virtually walk around it and take a closer look. And then there are some highlights of areas of suspected damage, issues. I think it's more kind of around the richness of the data
Yep.
versus any kind of report that you can generate by quickly, walking around. So if you ask the consumer, a seller of a vehicle, to use any other tool, they would produce maybe 10% of the output.
So it's much more accurate. It's kind of informed decisions. It's not as many variables in terms of what the person would be doing it in terms of kind of how a computer algorithm would work through it. So there's more consistency and accuracy to the data as well, essentially.
There's more consistency. There's probably more accuracy, and there's simply more data.
Yeah.
As you're trying to make an assessment quickly, you need the data, and if you lack data, then you are basically bidding less, or you're not bidding at all on that vehicle.
And you talked about things like claims and insurance claims in terms of vehicles inspection. So if you've been in a crash, essentially, I presume you can go through this process. Does it then link up to in terms of estimates or bills of materials of what would need replacing?
Yeah, we have this capability of actually predicting what would be the extent of the repair. That's a tricky one, obviously, because if you are looking at extensive damages, then there will always be the element of interior parts that have been affected. So we always, we call it an estimate. We don't call it like a definite
Yeah.
repair, because a lot of cases will go to the body shop. People will start disassembling the vehicle. So we basically focus on kind of the rough estimate from what we see. A lot of technology is working in the background to understand likely damage, and the main use case for that is, give the insurance company and the customer an early indication of the extent of the repair.
Awesome. So, in terms of, it seems you're quite advanced in terms of how you're implementing this kind of inspection process. Where do you see the role of kind of the big data and the data that you're consuming at the moment? Where do you see that kind of moving in the next 2 to 3 years, maybe 4 years, essentially?
It's a fascinating topic. I think, as you look at vehicles as a whole, the auto industry, the industry is moving towards more kind of reliable, more tech heavy vehicles, probably more expensive to start with. So you're looking at rising costs of parts. Yes, also rising cost of labor, but mainly parts and availability of parts. And so we think the impact on anybody that is owning a car or operating a car like a fleet is massive. If you are trying to make a decision quickly, can this car stay on the road? First. Second, if I now going to repair it, what's the extent of the cost? And can I inform the responsible party as well as the body shop and optimize that process? Now, as we get more and more data on the damages that we see on vehicles, we get more and more estimates and we get more repairs done, more claims submitted, we can start predicting things. So we will say, to a fleet manager, look, you've got 250 Tesla Model 3 on your platform. And, statistically speaking, 10% of those will have a front fender
Yep.
affected in the next 20 days. So look out for that. Maybe have a sort of arrangement with your body shop around that. And when this happens, these are the pictures you need to gather and get it repaired quickly. These things can translate into a lot of savings operationally for these fleets. Where right now, everything is manual. If you get a car damaged, you put it on the side, you get an engineer to assess it, you send it to the body shop, a repair suggestion comes back, you may approve it, you may not approve it. This is a big loss for
Yep.
some of these operators.
I suppose as well, with the kind of shift, like you're talking about, the price of cars has increased quite dramatically, especially in the EV market. It's like $100,000 for a brand new Tesla. That's where there's been a change in terms of subscription models. So you're leasing or renting, but subscribing essentially to using a vehicle. And these periodic inspections, rather than having to physically go somewhere or someone just saying, right, you've done 6,000 miles this year, there's another level that you can quite easily implement on someone's mobile phone, where they could just do a quick scan of the car, and then immediately the kind of the fleet owners know exactly what their depreciation should be, the quality of their stock. They know all that information in a very in an up-to-date manner without having to physically going out there and seeing all these vehicles. That's super interesting. I also love the idea about kind of forward purchasing those parts, because if you know that, like you said, like a front fender on a specific vehicle, and you have the foresight to go, well, if I buy 10, can I get a discounted purchase for buying 10? Because I know over the next 12 months or 6 months that we will. There's a high probability that we'll be able to exchange this. They can make informed decisions about kind of commercially buying those in bulk rather than kind of as a one-off every single time.
Exactly. And to elevate this conceptually, we will make cars more of predicted assets.
Mm-hmm.
That when you operate a fleet, you know how much you should allocate to repair them. What's the rough insurance cost on that vehicle if you're getting it insured, and what is the resale value? Because once you have that data on what's happened to this vehicle over time and how much you sold it, and you have that data at hand, all the decision making is much more data driven than kind of guesswork.
That's super interesting. We're coming to a conclusion today on today's podcast. I want to say a massive thank you for spending the time with us. I know you've been super busy over the past few weeks. So I've got a few closing questions for you. I won't make them too difficult. So the first one is, how can our listeners find out and hear more about Ravin AI? Where should they go, and what should they be reading or looking for?
So the first point of contact, obviously, our website, I think is full of content and demos, which is ravin.ai. That's the first kind of place I would go to. You're also welcome to follow us on LinkedIn. We post a lot of good stuff there. And if you're keen to learn more, please email us at info@ravin.ai. That's info@ravin.ai. We will pick it up pretty quickly, and we'd love to talk to you.
Awesome. And just one final question from me, just to kind of get a bit of an insight, is what was your first car that you either purchased or learned to drive in, or is there a memorable car that you have at all?
That's hilarious. Do you remember those Citroen BX that used to rise. They had like a
Yeah, they've got like a pneumatic suspension in the back.
exactly. So my grandmother just gave me one when she got her new car, and that was my first car. And I
Awesome.
did some nasty things to that car. I wouldn't even want to say it on air, but it survived. It was a pretty good piece.
Fantastic. That's great. Excellent. So thanks once again for joining us this afternoon and kind of sharing the information, the background of Ravin AI. Super interesting founding story. What you guys are doing is very interesting in the space. We wish you all the luck. Thank you to our listeners on the podcast for tuning in again, and look forward to hearing more. Thank you both.
Thank you.